What conspiracy theories turned out to be true, but most people are unaware? Story 1, CIA heart attack gun. A gun that shoots an ice block dart containing some animal, edit, shellfish poison, that dissolves denatured in the body. This poison would cause a heart attack, believing the victim dies under natural circumstances. The concept alone isn't even that hard to believe. The only hard part in making it would probably be the dissolving part and making it look genuine. I don't know why people wouldn't have just assumed it was a thing in existence. My reading is that the needle was plain ice laced with a toxin and a metallic core that conducted electricity as the firing mechanism. So the hard part would be keeping the bullets frozen until needed. The water melts, the toxin dissipates, and most autopsies are not going to look for excess levels of iron or copper or whatever. I can imagine what they have accomplished with another 40 years of development. Story 2, the Great Streetcar Conspiracy. The fact that the USA had one of the most advanced and developed public transit systems in the world in the 1950s, and it was deliberately curtailed, stopped, and dismantled in concert between the government, GM, Ford, and other car companies, leading to the promotion and expansion of the inefficient, wasteful suburban sprawls that dominate America today, all for the principal purpose of selling more cars. I definitely recommend a book called Happy City by Charles Montgomery. It lays out all that and then looks at cities throughout the world that have prospered by focusing on the people and their specific needs/wants instead of making cities just for cars. Very informative read. Story 3, that there's a global trafficking ring perpetrated by the elite. But bring it up and it's all, so you believe that children are being sold on Wayfair and held in the basement of a random DC pizza joint, huh? No. I believe that that crock of bullcrap is why everyone dismisses human trafficking as a moral panic. It does happen. It is happening. Two former presidents and a prince were close with the leader of it, and at the very least, I'm not debating their potential participation because that will hijack the point of this comment more than they are letting on about it. I mean, FFS. Maxwell's trial starts next month. How many people genuinely would know that if you stopped and asked them in the street? Story 4, I don't think a lot of people know they found the origin of the man from Taured story. Basically, the story goes back to the 50s when a man was stopped at an airport somewhere in Asia. His passport said he was from a country called Taured. The country does not exist. The police couldn't figure out who he was and took him to a fourth-floor hotel room. The man disappeared without the guards seeing him. There has been plenty of speculation of who the man was. Secret agent was probably the biggest theory. The whole story was based on an actual event, but nowhere near as intriguing as the conspiracy theories. Over time, it became a legend that's mentioned a lot, with stories like the Somerton Man. Recently, they have found the original story of the man from Taured, and it is very different than the legend it has. Story 5. In 1964, there were two incidents in the Gulf of Tonkin. The USS Maddox was performing illegal counterintelligence operations in North Vietnamese waters, and be illegal in the sense that they broke international laws in the process. The ship was met by three Vietnamese vessels, which fired warning shots, then leading to a brief skirmish between the two sides. The USS Maddox was struck by one bullet, a piece of aircraft was destroyed, and 6 Vietnamese soldiers were ended. No U.S. personnel were wounded. The NSA reported 2 days later that a second, more significant skirmish occurred, this time sprung directly by the Vietnamese, and that the USS Maddox had been formally attacked by Vietnamese forces. This spurred Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which formalized the war in Vietnam and gave Johnson the required authorization to start a full-fledged war against communist aggression in Southeast Asia. There's just one problem, though. The second skirmish, the attack that started the war, never happened. The Pentagon had received no records of an attack. The Maddox showed no sign of damage other than a solitary bullet hole from the previous skirmish, and radar signals for that day showed no Vietnamese submarines. It was a complete fiction invented by the NSA to rally public support behind the U.S. getting involved in Vietnam. People had been skeptical even back in the 60s, but a declassified report on the incident in 2005 confirmed that indeed no skirmish had occurred on August 4th. Only the light skirmish from August 2nd had any evidence of occurring whatsoever. Many historians now believe the U.S. was intentionally trying to bait an attack by the North in order to justify post hoc escalation of forces in the region. But when no satisfactory incident occurred, they decided to simply make one up. After all, who's going to tell the world it didn't? The North Vietnamese? Is the American public supposed to believe the words of their enemies before their own governments? This was a time when the public in general was much less skeptical of its government's intentions than it would prove to be after the war. Most people believed what the president and his men said, as a general principle. Story 6. The Federal Housing Association denied loans to black people and those who would associate themselves with people who were black. Redlining began in 1933, and it was designed to segregate America's housing stock. The concept was terminated in the 1960s, but our housing market has never fully recovered. Today, companies still use this concept to manipulate different demographics using digital media. It's known as digital redlining. There's evidence that social media platforms such as Facebook used digital redlining. Based on the data collected from zip codes, ages, and gender, certain ads were filtered. Also, broadband companies like T-Mobile and iTant are being accused of digital redlining. Certain locations with a poorer demographic receive crappier services than richer neighborhoods. Digital redlining impacts and maintains the digital divide that plagues the United States. The worst part is that it's legal for companies to do this. Yvette D. Clarke introduced the Anti-Digital Redlining Act this year, asking the FCC to prohibit digital redlining. To my knowledge, the issue has not been resolved. Story 7. The reason why MSG, monosodium glutamate, got a bad rap is because the West looked at Asian cuisine as dangerous or dirty and made a correlation between headaches, palpitations, etc. and MSG without concrete scientific data to back it up. In reality, MSG doesn't have negative health effects, and all it ever did was enhance that umami flavor. To anyone reading the comments below this claim that they actually do have bad reactions to MSG, they're bullcrap. Both posts are just complaining about processed foods and snacks. Inexplicably, these people somehow don't have a reaction to meat, eggs, cheese, tomatoes, broccoli, kale, shellfish, mushrooms, walnuts, peas, corn, or any other of the thousands of good foods that have MSG. Story 8. In the US, tax companies like H&R Block and TurboTax lobbied the government to intentionally keep taxes absurdly difficult to file so that you'd be more likely to pay for their services. The IRS has all the information needed to basically just send you a bill to review once a year, but they instead ensure that citizens have to fill out needlessly complicated and extensive forms, confirming what the government already knows, just so tax companies can receive an obscene amount of money annually. Story 9. Conspiracies and collusion happen all the time. The powerful world leaders and corporations collude and pull strings. The reason DDR4 RAM was so much more expensive than DDR3, and the price never dropped, was because the manufacturers colluded to all keep their prices high and to not be competitive. The sinking of the Lusitania. It was a civilian liner, but was carrying a cache of ammunition. That information was deliberately leaked to the Germans, and they sank the ship, causing outrage in the USSA and generating public support for U.S. entry into the war against Germany. This was not the only thing that was used to generate public support for going to war against Germany. Germany asked Mexico to attack the USA if the USA chose to declare war on Germany, and this was also used to stir up anger at Germany. Story 10. It was a common conspiracy that the DPRK was kidnapping people and kids from other countries and raising them to be and teach spies foreign language and culture so that they could move out as spies undetected, since they would look or sound too foreign to be North Korean. Megumi Yokota is a very popular example and common knowledge to many people on the streets of Japan. She was kidnapped on her way home from school. Eyewitnesses say that they saw a vessel speeding out into the Sea of Japan in the direction of North Korea. It is allegedly known that she is alive and married, living in Pyongyang. Her family to this day only wishes for her safety, happiness, and possible return and escape to Japan someday. Story 11. Governments stage terror attacks. Used over and over by governments for hundreds of years to motivate their people for war. 1780s. Swedish King Gustav III, looking to start a war with Russia, dressed some of his own troops in Russian military uniforms and ordered them attack a Swedish outpost on the Russian border. The ruse worked, and the Swedes, outraged at the Russian attack, gave the king the authority and blessing to launch a defensive war. 1941, the Japanese were looking for a pretext to invade Manchuria. In September of that year, a lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army detonated a small amount of TNT along a Japanese-owned railway in the Manchurian city of Mukden. The act was blamed on Chinese dissonance and was used to justify the occupation of Manchuria 6 months later. When this was later exposed, Japan was forced to withdraw from the League of Nations. 1964, USS Maddox, a U.S. destroyer on patrol in the Gulf of Tonkin, believed it had come under attack from North Vietnamese Navy torpedo boats, engaging in evasive action and returning fire. The incident led to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution authorizing President Johnson to begin open warfare in Vietnam. It was later admitted that no attack had occurred, and in 2005, it was revealed that the NSA had manipulated their information to make it look like an attack had taken place. Story 12. The 2008 recession was a depression, but spurred a recession we still have yet to get out of. In 2021, heading into 2022, the reason being the U.S. government changed the measurement of unemployment. The U3 unemployment is the one shared publicly, which is a bare minimum measurement. People who applied for unemployment. It does not account for people who have given up looking for work or people who are underemployed. One example is someone who spends all of April unemployed. If you got a one-day gig on April 13th, congratulations. According to the feds, you were employed for the entire month of April. The U6 unemployment numbers account for these and are considerably higher. September numbers were near 10%. Never have the U6 numbers dipped below what they were pre-2008. Story 13. The government is spraying us from the sky, 1950. San Francisco. Operation Sea Spray. U.S. Navy secretly sprayed the population with Serotia marcescens, a human pathogen. They were trying to determine the susceptibility of a large city like San Francisco to a bioweapon attack by terrorists. 1953, Winnipeg or Alberta. U.S. Army secretly dumped a carcinogen on unknowing Canadians in Winnipeg and Alberta as part of a Cold War weapons test. In 1977, the U.S. Army confirmed they conducted 239 germ warfare tests in open air between 1949 to 1969, using the public as guinea pigs in New York, San Fran, Key West, and numerous other cities. Story 14. Many things in animal agriculture. Marketing for chicken products suggests chickens live a happy life. Behind closed doors, they macerate most males on the day of birth. Chickens barely have any space to move. They live in sheds under horrific conditions for their lifespan cut short at around 42 days. Chickens only see the light of the sun on the terrifying drive to the slaughterhouse after being alive for only 6 short weeks. This is just one example with one animal, albeit probably the most abused species on Earth. When animal rights activists explain objective reality, people think it's just a conspiracy to get people against animal agriculture. Nope, it's just objectively reality that we would prefer to ignore because it is sad, so we label it as conspiracy or propaganda. Watch Dominion the documentary if you want to learn more about other animals. Story 15, U.S. generals were lying that Vietnam was going great to Lyndon Johnson until the Pentagon parts were released. The Vietnam War was never about helping South Vietnam. It was to create a bulwark against communist China. The U.S. aimed to contain China through the Japanese Korea Front, the India-Pakistan Front, and the Southeastern Asian Front. The U.S. admits that without U.S. support, South Vietnam would not exist. The U.S. was also involved in the overthrow of Diem in 1963, helping in his assassination. It was declassified in 2011, but to this day, there are parts that still have not been declassified. It's a wild ride giving us a better example of why we got into war in the first place. Story 16, I remember being in second grade, seeing the Got Milk ads that told us our bones would turn into soft noodles if we didn't drink milk at every meal. And I thought someone had to pay a lot of money to put these posters up everywhere with celebrities and their milk mustaches. And milk makes me feel like crap, so I think this is a lie. Several years later, I experienced something similar with whole grains pushed in the same way, which also makes me feel like crap. So I concluded this too was a lie of the agriculture industry. It's hard to have moderation when the PTB wants to cram you full of their garbage as often as possible, and many times without your awareness. Story 17. This is very Southern high school football. But there was a conspiracy theory that was mostly treated as a joke that these two high schools were bribing kids who were good at football into moving into their districts. Mostly it was spurred by the realization that a bunch of star players on both teams were transfers and had been for years. It was mostly laughed off because most of them claimed that they moved for the better football program rather than the other way around. Eventually there was an investigation and basically the coaches, with financial support from God knows where, were literally paying for apartments for these families to change high school neighborhoods so they could join their program. And in at least two cases, they bought them cars. Story 18. Not the strangest, but the British Army murdered 14 unarmed civilians during a peaceful civil rights march in my city, Derry, Northern Ireland, in 1972. The official line for years was that the victims were armed and had attacked the soldiers first. The Sun newspaper in the UK printed a story the next day portraying the soldiers as heroes and the victims as terrorists. The government eventually admitted about 10 years ago that none of the victims were armed and the events were not provoked. Makes it hard to believe anything the government or media say. Story 19, Georgia Tann. Georgia Tann was a woman who lived in Tennessee in the USA. She ran the first successful adoption agency in the United States, owned and operated the Tennessee Children's Home Society, and was largely responsible for adoption becoming a thing in the USA. For years, there were rumors and whispers of atrocities being committed at her children's home, and she was also regularly accused of kidnapping and black market adoptions, stealing children from poor and/or single mothers, and selling the kids off to well-to-do couples. Accusations that were largely considered conspiratorial nonsense and largely ignored as she was too influential and connected in high society. And she was allowed to continue operating, and she did from 1924 to 1950. However, a changing political and cultural landscape caused pressure to be applied to Tann, and when she was diagnosed with cancer, she began to slip up. Some of these slip-ups were noticed by law enforcement. So on September 11th of 1950, a legal investigation was launched into the children's home. Tann succumbed to her cancer on September 15th, 1950, before the investigation could begin in earnest. Story 20, I took a class in college called Deception Management. It was taught by a world-renowned author and deception management professional. His name is David Camp. Look him up if you don't believe me. One class in particular that we had will always remain with me. He made two comments. First, he showed us a video of when Obama came into office. When Obama gets done with his speech, he goes in the back to discuss personal matters. My professor elaborated that this was a very confidential meeting. When Obama returned, he told us that something in that man's demeanor changed, and he seemed completely on edge. Freaky. The second one, he showed us a picture of the moment Bush was told of the attacks on the towers. For anyone who doesn't know, deception management involves micro-expressions, which are subtle expressions that the face gives off. Good indicators for a baseline. The picture showed Bush being informed while he was reading a book to a bunch of children, except the look on his face isn't of surprise, but more blank. Like he knew something was up. Crazy crap. Story 21, not much of a conspiracy, but the US government was hiding evidence for extraterrestrial beings from the public eye. Until around 2017-ish, may have been 2018, can't remember which, the United States government red-headed footage captured by the US Air Force and Navy of unidentified aerial vehicles moving faster than any fighter jet the US military had to offer. In an open statement, the government told the public that they really had no idea what they were. Their theories included Russian-Chinese technology far more advanced than what the United States has, a casual phenomenon that interfered with radar systems and optics, as well as extraterrestrial life. As far as I'm aware, the US government now has a division dedicated to studying footage, locations, and other unexplained situations to try and figure out what was going on. Story 22. The descendant organizations that built and owned the Titanic denied it broke in half while sinking until the wreck was found in two pieces. I have no idea why. None of the original engineers or proprietors were still around. But as recently as the late 1970s and early 1980s, survivors who said it broke were dismissed as suffering from delusions brought on by hyperthermia. Despite no direct involvement, the contemporary lineage of White Star and Harland and Wolff were adamant there was absolutely no way it could have broken the way it did. Then Ballard found it, and the denial never spoke of it again. Story 23, Britney Spears was being held in an illegal and immoral conservatorship by her father, who essentially sold her off to a corporation in exchange for some of his debts. She was being drugged to keep her submissive, her children held against her, and forced to work incredibly long hours with no say and no time off. Slavery. While her entire family stole and then lived off the money she earned. Since her social media was controlled by this conservative institution, she sent hidden messages to her fans begging for help. At some point, she posted about taking some time off since her father was having health problems, but that wasn't her. It was posted by her conservatorship team to hide the fact she was being kept for months in solitary confinement against her will. Story 24. It used to be an open secret that the media lies to the public. Little did we realize the system is built on lies, and lies are the most profitable. Important things happen across the world, but I'm supposed to know or care about Taylor Swift's relationship status. There are two massive wars going on right now that the US has indirect involvement in, and we are still in the privileged humdrum of discussing Ye's thoughts about people. I just don't care. He's not a world leader. Keep in mind when you read the news what is not being presented and the biases the sources have. I get my news by cross-referencing multiple sources, and yeah, I've seen a few hoaxes and just straight up lies start or gain traction on Reddit, just like the sycophants at Fox News or CNN. It's honestly disgusting the double standards of news events and how they are reported on this website. But everywhere you go, the bias is this intense. It almost makes you want to never hear another opinion from someone on the internet, because every opinion is verified by some source of facts, backed by indignant retribution. Story 25, germ theory. Instead, putrid air, the miasma, was thought to be the cause of many illnesses, and you may be prescribed a trip to the seaside or your country house. Great book, The Ghost Map, about how one doctor in London tracked the cholera epidemic using a population health approach. His name was John Snow, and he showed how deaths traced back to one polluted water well. This was one of the nails in the coffin for the miasma theory, and opened up debate at the Royal Society for Alternative Causes of Illness. Story 26. Probably won't be seen by anybody, but the fact that the city of Niagara Falls was well aware of the Hooker chemical dump site and were specifically advised to not build anything there, at least not unless they did a massive cleanup. Then, after the Love Canal neighborhood was built, complete with 2 schools, 0 cleanup in sight, and everyone living there started getting sick or being born with odd deformities, the city tried to cover it up, insisting that it had nothing to do with the land. This tragedy is the reason that EPA superfunds to clean up industrial waste even exist in the U.S. Story 27. In 1986, Mexico imported radioactive powdered milk, fully knowing it was contaminated. The National Company of Popular Subsistences, Conasupo, provided milk to lower-income populations in Mexico, and they bought it from the Irish Dairy Board, IDB. The problem was that following the Chernobyl accident, Ireland experienced radioactive fallout, affecting its territory, crops, and livestock. The IDB attempted to sell 40,000 tons of contaminated milk, first to Brazil, which rejected the offer, and then to Mexico, despite warnings from the World Health Organization and the Brazilian ambassador about the presence of radioactive cesium 137 particles. The Mexican Ministry of Health authorized Conasupo to import 2,436.35 tons of this milk. When the situation came to light, it was stated that the milk would be returned and not distributed. Well, it was still distributed, and to avoid localized harm, they sold it all throughout Mexico. Despite warnings and confirmation of the milk's radioactivity levels by the National Institute of Nuclear Research and the National Commission for Nuclear Safety and Safeguards, Conasupo proceeded with its plans because the milk was cheap, and they feared commercial repercussions. The Mexican government denied these events for a long time, even accusing several people of defamation and firing them from their jobs for speaking the truth. Eventually, under public pressure, the Ministry of Health ordered the return of the milk shipments in February 1988. God knows if they followed through. In the following decade, there was a 300% rise in cancer among children, the main consumers of this milk. As you can guess, justice was never served.